Deep space offers no reflection, only an endless, starving dark. Far beyond the warming glow of any star, a solitary leviathan parts the cosmic dust. This is the Omnis Arcanum. It does not hunt. It does not race toward the fires of an active war zone. Instead, the mighty battle barge drifts like a mechanical ghost through the absolute silence of the void. Its immense hull is a jagged silhouette of cathedral spires and armoured bulwarks, scarred by centuries of silent vigil. Deep within its heart, the rhythmic, bass-heavy thrum of colossal plasma drives pulses like a dying heartbeat. Most vessels of this class are instruments of pure, unadulterated wrath. A standard Adeptus Astartes battle barge is a floating fortress capable of breaking planetary blockades and delivering companies of superhuman transhumans into the meat grinder of orbital assault. They are the ultimate expressions of the Emperor's fury, bristling with macro cannons, bombardment cannons, and launch bays for swarms of gunships. The Omnis Arcanum possesses all these apocalyptic weapons, yet it is something else entirely. It is a heavily fortified museum, a reliquary adrift in the starless ocean. Past the adamantium plating and the macro batteries lies an interior that resembles a sprawling Gothic monastery more than a warship. Shadows cling to the vaulted ceilings of the central corridors. The air here is thick and still. It carries the dry, unmistakable scent of ancient vellum, cracked leather binding, and the sweet, heavy smoke of burning incense. Flickering lumen strips struggle against the encroaching gloom, casting weak pools of amber light over mountains of towering databanks and silent cogitator arrays. This is the Librarium Sanctorum. Rows upon rows of stasis-locked vaults and iron-bound tomes stretch into the darkness, carefully curated and meticulously guarded. Candlelight dances across the polished ceramite of the silent sentinels standing watch in the alcoves. These armoured figures remain perfectly motionless, brooding and isolated as they guard the accumulated knowledge of 10 millennia. Across the war-torn expanse of the 41st millennium, the motivations of the Adeptus Astartes vary as wildly as the worlds they conquer. Some chapters fight for the sheer, brutal glory of the kill, eager to carve their legends into the flesh of their enemies. Others fight out of a stubborn, desperate instinct for survival, holding the line against the encroaching horrors of the alien and the heretic. The Blood Ravens fight for the past. They are a brotherhood defined not by the territory they hold, but by the secrets they hoard. Knowledge is their true currency, their obsession, and their damnation. Every crusade, every brutal compliance, and every drop-pod assault is ultimately a means to an end. They bleed and die to recover fragmented lore, lost artifacts, and forgotten truths buried beneath the ash of ruined worlds. This obsessive hoarding isolates them from their peers. Other sons of the Emperor view the Blood Ravens with suspicion, wary of a chapter so willing to prioritize the recovery of a rusted reliquary over the defense of a hive city. Yet the quiet halls of the Omnis Arcanum continue to fill with the spoils of their peculiar war. The deeper one ventures into the labyrinthine archives of the Librarium, the colder the air becomes. The grand tapestries and litanies of victory give way to restricted vaults sealed behind layers of hexagrammic wards. Within these forbidden depths, the flickering candles cast long, distorted shadows against doors of solid iron. The silence here is no longer peaceful, but expectant and heavy. Behind these sealed portals lie the answers the chapter so desperately seeks, along with the terrible, creeping shadows of a truth they may never be able to outrun. Deep within the soaring scriptoriums of the Omnis Arcanum, the true burden of the chapter reveals itself not in the clash of bolters, but in the frantic, ceaseless scratch of autoquills. Here, sequestered beneath vaults of stained armor-glass and forged iron, the librarians of the Blood Ravens willingly surrender their sanity to the silence. They ruin their eyes in the dim glow of stasis-sealed lumen globes, turning the crumbling pages of forgotten treatises and sifting through the pulverized ashes of dead empires. They are searching for a single elusive syllable. They are searching for the name of their father. Every Adeptus Astartes is a genetically sculpted weapon, yet their psychology is irrevocably tethered to the mythic figure of their Primarch. The gene seed that reshapes a frail mortal into a transhuman warrior carries far more than mere physical enhancement. It bears the immense psycho-spiritual legacy of a living demigod. The proud Ultramarines draw boundless strength and unbreakable discipline from the statesmanship of Primarch Guilliman, seeing his perfection in every tactical maneuver. The noble Blood Angels find their tragic glory and devastating artistic fury in the mirrored sacrifice of Sanguinius. These sacred lineages provide an indestructible anchor in the relentless madness of a hostile galaxy. They offer a profound, unshakable sense of belonging, a cosmic purpose inscribed into the very marrow and bone of the Battle Brothers. The Blood Ravens possess absolutely none of this foundational grace. They are orphans adrift in a cruel imperium obsessed with the purity of blood and the unbroken chains of heritage. In a regime where a warrior's worth is entirely dictated by the nobility of his ancestors, to be devoid of a known progenitor is an agony unlike any physical wound. It is a festering, rotting psychological void. The chapter is consumed by a silent, collective shame that echoes through their grand, hollow reliquaries. They whisper prayers to the revered figure they know only as the unknown Primarch. He is venerated entirely in the dark, worshipped through an impenetrable veil of absolute ignorance. He is nothing but a shadowed silhouette standing at the terrifying genesis of their history. Statues in their central chapels deliberately depict a colossal, hooded figure with a blank expanse where a face should be. This faceless effigy serves as the ultimate manifestation of their profound spiritual starvation. Countless centuries are spent analyzing their own combat doctrines, their unusually high incidence of psychic mutation, and their scattered, fragmented heraldry in a desperate attempt to divine his identity. Scholars debate whether they are the loyalist remnants of a traitor legion, forever cursed to hide their supreme shame behind a wall of silence. Others whisper they might be a forbidden experiment sealed away by the direct command of the Emperor himself. Every reluctantly answered question breeds only a dozen more tantalizing, agonizing mysteries. This bottomless well of historical uncertainty poisons their peace and twists their noble imperial purpose. The chapter masters and epistolaries pore over contradictory auguries and half-destroyed data slates, eternally haunted by the paralyzing fear that their true origins might remain obscured until the stars burn out. This relentless, agonizing hunger for truth gradually ferments into an all-consuming fire. If the galaxy will not freely yield up the desperately needed secrets of their past, the Blood Ravens have resolved that they will rip those secrets from its iron grasp. Whispers echo through the vast administratum halls of the Imperium, painting the Blood Ravens with the crude brush of thievery. Among the Astra Militarum and rival chapters, they are sometimes mocked as scavengers who will strip a war zone bare of its most sacred relics. Yet this infamous reputation obscures a much darker tragedy. They do not take from the galaxy out of greed. They hoard history because they are utterly terrified of the abyss. Bereft of a father and stripped of a genesis, the Blood Ravens suffer a crushing existential dread that they themselves will simply cease to be. If they are not anchored to the physical artifacts of the past, they fear the galaxy will forget them entirely. Their obsessive acquisition protocols dictate battle plans that defy all tactical logic. A Blood Raven strike force will abruptly abandon a besieged hive city to secure a tertiary objective, leaving millions of Imperial citizens to burn. Entire regiments of the Imperial Guard have bled out in freezing mud, completely unaware that their Adeptus Astartes saviors diverted a drop-pod assault just to retrieve a fragmentary data slate or a single scorched piece of ancient ceramite. Flesh is temporary, but a relic proves that someone existed. To these warriors, the survival of a historical record far outweighs the survival of a living world. The true horror of this obsession lies in their bureaucratic labyrinth. Deep within the Omnis Arcanum, the chapter maintains sprawling stasis vaults filled with weapons, banners and armor that clearly belong to other institutions. Blades forged for the Ultramarines rest in shadow, while golden war gear bearing the unmistakable sigils of the Adeptus Custodes is carefully polished by artificers. The Bloodravens do not record these as stolen goods. Through an act of staggering institutional delusion, their librarians meticulously catalogue every pilfered artifact as a sacred gift or a solemn rescue. They convince themselves that these items were entrusted to their care by a dying hero or salvaged from unworthy hands to be preserved in the name of the Emperor. It is gaslighting on a galactic scale, a collective madness carefully documented on millions of parchment scrolls. Every stolen bolter and every misappropriated power sword is a desperate attempt to stitch together a substitute heritage. They wrap themselves in the legacy of others to keep the cold void of their own anonymity at bay. This manic hoarding cannot heal the wound at the center of their existence. The artifacts only serve to highlight the glaring irregularities hidden within their own bodies. Underneath the pilfered armor, the warriors themselves carry a genetic legacy that defies standard Imperial categorization. The thirst for hidden truths is merely a symptom of a deeper, biological affliction. Beneath the ceramite plates of the Bloodravens beats a cursed lineage. Their gene seed breeds an unnatural abundance of psychers. While other chapters count themselves fortunate to possess a handful of battle brothers gifted with the warp, the Bloodravens harbour entire cabals of them. Epistolaries and codicils walk the halls of their strike cruisers in terrifying numbers. They wield immense Empyrean power, yet they live in constant, agonizing fear of the mutations that inevitably stalk such gifts. This psychic saturation dictates the very hierarchy of the chapter. The Librarium does not merely advise the command structure, it is the command structure. Sanctioned mystics hold unprecedented political authority over their brethren. Custom and tradition bend to the will of the warp-touched, culminating in a dangerous concentration of authority, where a single Space Marine might hold the titles of both Chapter Master and Chief Librarian. Such a convergence of martial and psychic dominance teeters perpetually on the precipice of madness. Those who guide the chapter gaze constantly into the immaterium, exposing their minds to the whispering corruptions of the ruinous powers. Whispers echo through the deepest vaults of the Ordo Hereticus regarding the true origin of this tainted blood. Certain forbidden texts point toward a horrifying genesis rooted in the Horus heresy. The ancient Corvidae cult of the traitorous Thousand Sons shared an identical obsession with prophecy, psychic mastery, and hidden lore. The Bloodravens chant the very same maxim once spoken by the fallen scholars of Prospero: knowledge is power, guard it well. During the deepest meditative trances, epistolaries often suffer agonizing visions of a great crimson-armored warrior crying out in eternal torment. This parallel is a genetic sword of Damocles hanging over the entire chapter. If the blood of Magnus flows through their veins, then the threat of sudden catastrophic mutation is an inescapable destiny. The spectre of the flesh change haunts every spell cast and every warp rift opened by their battle psychers. To carry such a lineage is to harbour the seed of damnation within one's own flesh. Their desperate hoarding of relics and history becomes a frantic attempt to cure or conceal a biological heresy that cannot be excised. Every generation born of this gene seed dances upon the edge of a blade, praying their minds and bodies do not betray the Emperor. This terrifying reality dictates their deployments and their relentless crusades across the stars. They seek answers in the void, while fiercely defending the borders of the Imperium from encroaching horrors. The burdens of their tainted heritage demand a crucible in which their absolute loyalty can be proven in blood and fire. Such a proving ground exists within a specific cluster of embattled worlds, overseen by a singular commander who would ultimately forge the modern era of the Bloodravens. A spacefaring chapter, unbound by the gravity of a single planetary domain, must still harvest the flesh of humanity to sustain its eternal war. For the Blood Ravens, this bloody tithe is drawn from the celestial cluster known as Subsector Aurelia. They claim no solitary homeworld as their cradle. Instead, they cast their sovereign shadow across an entire swath of the galactic rim. Billions of human souls live and die beneath the watchful, unseen eyes of their transhuman masters. Three distinct worlds form the crucible from which the chapter draws its initiates. Calderis burns beneath a scorching sun, a feral planet defined by harsh deserts and fractured tribal warfare. Only the most violent and resilient youths survive the daily struggle against arid wastelands and rival clans. These primitive blood feuds forge ideal candidates for the aspirant trials, stripping away all weakness before the chapter even makes contact. Further outward lies Typhon Primaris, a verdant hellscape classified as a death world. Choking, venomous jungles blanket its entire surface, hiding lethal flora and apex predators that hunt beneath the dense canopy. Survival on Typhon requires a ruthless cunning and a hardened constitution that the chapter refines into martial excellence. Contrasting these savage domains is Meridian, the administrative capital of the system. It is a sprawling hive world of towering steel spires and grinding bureaucratic machineries. Billions suffocate in the claustrophobic darkness of its lower levels, laboring endlessly to fuel the Imperial tithe. Beneath the gilded towers of the nobility, vicious gang warfare breeds hardened street fighters perfectly suited to become aspirants of the Adeptus Astartes. The Blood Ravens defend these three worlds with absolute unforgiving fury. Any Xenos or heretic threat that encroaches upon Subsector Aurelia is met with the overwhelming wrath of the chapter. Yet this protection is completely devoid of compassion. The Space Marines view these planets with a cold, clinical detachment. They are not guardians of the innocent, but custodians of a vital resource. The billions who populate Calderis, Typhon, and Meridian are treated as little more than livestock. They represent a vast and ignorant breeding ground cultivated strictly to replenish the combat losses of the chapter. When the drop pods and gunships descend from the heavens, the citizens weep with religious awe, believing divine angels have come to deliver them. They remain blissfully ignorant of the cosmic horrors these armored giants often bring in their wake. The masses do not comprehend the agonizing biological alchemy that awaits the boys stolen away into the void. The blood of Subsector Aurelia flows directly into the veins of the chapter, binding the fate of these worlds to the destiny of their secretive masters. Decade after decade, the harvest continues without end. From this relentless cycle of exploitation and brutal selection, one particular youth would rise from the doomed world of Cyrene to alter the trajectory of the Blood Ravens forever. His name is Gabriel Angelos. Blackened cinders choke the void where a jewel of the subsector once spun. Cyrene was a world of vast spires and teeming millions, a vital recruitment ground for the Adeptus Astartes. Now it is a dead rock, completely stripped of atmosphere and life. The architect of this absolute annihilation was not an alien warlord or a creature of the Immaterium, it was a son of Cyrene itself. Gabriel Angelos, captain of the Blood Ravens' Third Company, ordered the death of his own homeworld. He had returned from his crusades to find the seeds of rot taking hold among the populations that birthed him. Heretical cults had infiltrated the planetary governance, weaving their insidious blasphemies into the very fabric of society. Even the Angelos family line was not spared from this creeping taint. Faced with systemic heresy, an ordinary man might falter, blinded by the bonds of blood, history, and nostalgia. Gabriel Angelos was not an ordinary man. He possessed the terrifying, absolute fanaticism required of the Emperor's true servants. With a heavy heart and an unbroken will, the captain transmitted the encryption codes that summoned the full wrath of the Inquisition to end his world. The skies of Cyrene ignited in apocalyptic fury. Lances of pure thermal energy pierced the cloud cover, boiling the oceans and flash-frying billions of innocent and guilty alike in a fraction of a heartbeat. Cyclonic warheads burrowed deep into the planetary crust, shattering tectonic plates and unleashing oceans of subterranean magma. From the silent observation deck of his strike cruiser, Gabriel stood motionless and watched his childhood burn. Ash began to fall like thick winter snow across the dying continents, settling over the charred remains of majestic hives, ancient monuments, and his own kin. The flames consumed everything, leaving only ghosts and absolute silence in their wake. When an inquisitor orders an exterminatus, the sweeping edict is often born of cold calculus and detached pragmatism. They are mortal agents of pure authority, shielded by vast cosmic distance and unyielding dogma. For an Astartes, the burden is infinitely heavier. Space Marines are forged to be the ultimate protectors of mankind, genetically sculpted to defend the Emperor's realm against impossible odds. To willingly shatter the very shield they were made to raise, to turn the ultimate weapon upon the very cradle that forged them, requires a profound tearing of their own soul. Gabriel carries the screaming silence of billions within his heavily augmented mind. The guilt is a crushing physical weight, an agonizing psychic scar that sets him permanently apart from his unburdened battle brothers. He is no longer just a commander of men. He is a living, breathing tomb for the memory of an entire world. This solitary act of supreme devastation forged a warrior defined as much by unrelenting tragedy as by his tactical brilliance. Gabriel Angelos emerged from the ashes of his homeworld, bearing a solemn conviction that no heresy would ever again take root in the shadows of his watch. The pyre of Cyrene burned an indelible mark into the soul of the Blood Ravens. Such an absolute sacrifice would soon catch the attention of forces far beyond the Aurelia subsector, pulling the captain and his battle brothers toward a reckoning that would rip the veil of the galaxy wide open. Green-skinned fury descended upon the Imperial world of Tartarus in a howling tide of rusted iron and savage brutality. Warboss Orcamungus unleashed a war-arg of staggering proportions across the continent, drowning hive cities and industrial sectors in a sea of roaring aliens. Millions of Imperial citizens perished in the opening days of the slaughter, as planetary defense forces shattered under the sheer weight of the vanguard. The sky burned with the fiery trails of crude drop rocks, slamming into the earth like the fists of an angry god. Into this cauldron of carnage stepped Gabriel Angelos and the third company of the Blood Ravens. Drop pods slammed into the ruined surface, disgorging Adeptus Astartes straight into the heart of the Xenos swarm. Bolter-fire tore through the massed ranks of Orc infantry, while chainswords chewed through thick green muscle and bone. Gabriel commanded his brothers from the front lines, his power swords severing limbs with every devastating swing. The Blood Ravens fought with cold, calculating fury, securing vital spaceports and holding the line where mortal men had entirely collapsed. Blood and promethium soaked the ash-choked soil of Tartarus as the Third Company exacted a terrible toll upon the Horde. Yet amidst the deafening roar of battle, a chilling realization took hold of the Space Marine commander. Orcs exist only for war, seeking out the greatest fights with reckless abandon. But the movements of this invasion displayed a strange, unnatural focus. Entire mobs bypassed strategic military targets to assault seemingly irrelevant sectors of the world. The Greenskin assault was too localized, too perfectly timed, and lacked the chaotic spontaneity inherent to their violent species. They were not the vanguard of a true planetary conquest. Orcamungus and his screaming billions were merely a smokescreen. This scent of deeper heresy drew the unyielding gaze of the Holy Ordos. Inquisitor Mordecai Toth of the Ordo Malleus arrived on Tartarus wielding the full, terrifying authority of the Inquisition. Toth did not view the Blood Ravens as heroic saviors, but as variables of immense and unacceptable risk. He watched Gabriel Angelos with unblinking suspicion, demanding total compliance and the immediate evacuation of the entire planet. The Adeptus Astartes guard their traditions jealously, and the Blood Ravens are a chapter fundamentally defined by their shadowed past. Friction sparked immediately between the pragmatic, fiercely independent Space Marine commander and the paranoid, uncompromising Inquisitor. Toth cared nothing for the millions dying in the crossfire, focusing solely on a buried taint he believed the Space Marines were too blind to comprehend. He issued veiled threats, his hand hovering over the mandate of Exterminatus. Gabriel refused to abandon the world to ruin, pushing deeper into the blood-soaked campaign against the enemy lines. Every Orc outpost broken and every looted fortress purged brought the Blood Ravens closer to a sickening truth. The Greenskins had been baited to Tartarus, manipulated into tearing the world open by unseen hands. They were bleeding the Imperial defenders dry to unearth something ancient and profane hidden beneath the crust of the world. Dark whispers began to echo from the warp, carrying the cold malice of an orchestrator infinitely worse than the screaming alien horde. The green tide of the Orcs was never the true threat. Behind the crude savagery of the alien horde lay the intricate machinations of the Alpha Legion. Masters of subterfuge and misdirection, these traitor Astartes had come to Tartarus not to conquer the world, but to excavate it. At the head of this shadowed invasion stood Chaos Lord Baal, a brute of terrifying power who served as the iron fist of the operation. Baal believed himself the undisputed master of this campaign, commanding his corrupted warriors to crush any who interfered with the dig. He provided the brute force, the heavy bolter fire and roaring chainswords necessary to shatter the Imperial lines. Yet Baal was merely another blunt instrument in the hands of the true architect of the planetary slaughter, the Chaos Sorcerer Sindri Mir. Sindri treated the entire conflict as a grand, bloody ritual. With whispered promises and projected illusions, he had goaded the Greenskins into a planetary rampage. This mindless destruction forced the Imperial Guard and the Space Marines to commit entirely to a desperate defense. Every drop of blood spilled in the ruined cities, and ash wastes masked the dark sorcery bleeding from the Alpha Legion encampments. While the Loyalists exhausted their ammunition and their lives against the alien tide, Sindri directed a massive labor force to dig deep beneath the crust of Tartarus. They sought something ancient, an obscenity buried long before the Imperium ever charted this star system. The genius of the sorcerer lay in his precise understanding of his enemies. The Blood Ravens have always been scholars as much as warriors, haunted by the missing chapters of their own history. Their librarius hoards esoteric texts and forbidden scrolls that other loyalists would rightfully burn. Sindri recognized this fatal flaw festering within the psyche of the chapter. He knew of their insatiable thirst for hidden knowledge, their desperate need to uncover forgotten truths and possess ancient relics. Instead of shielding his operation entirely from their Auspex scanners, Sindri deliberately left breadcrumbs of dark lore scattered across the war zone. Desecrated shrines bore cryptic runes of the ruinous powers. Captured traitors babbled of a terrible power waiting in the dark. Scattered databanks contained corrupted fragments of history that hinted at a prize beyond measure. These carefully placed fragments were a poison tailored specifically for the Blood Ravens. The Space Marines could not simply destroy the taint and move on. They were compelled to investigate, to decipher, to master the mysteries laid before them. Each clue they unraveled drew them further away from the primary war effort and deeper into the coils of the Alpha Legion. Sindri guided them like blind prey through a maze, ensuring that their obsession would blind them to the trap snapping shut around their necks. He needed the Loyalists to clear the final obstacles, to act as the ultimate sacrifice for his unholy ascension. The Alpha Legion merely waited in the shadows as the massive subterranean vault was finally breached by the digging machines. The scarred soil of Tartarus gave way to black iron and blasphemous architecture. Deep within that buried temple, an artifact of world-shattering ruins sang a silent song into the immaterium, waiting for a righteous soul to reach out and claim it. Blood soaked the scorched soil of Tartarus, a dark offering orchestrated by the Alpha Legion to tear the veil between realms. Deep beneath the crust, the sorcerer Sindri Mir unearthed his ultimate prize, The Maledictum rose from the subterranean shadows, an ancient altar of black stone pulsing with the malice of a captive warp entity. Empowered by the senseless slaughter of orcs, Eldari, and humans alike, Sindri embraced the surging tides of the Immaterium. Mortal flesh boiled away and bones snapped under the pressure of unnatural growth as the sorcerer ascended. He was reborn as a demon prince of chaos, horned and wreathed in soul-searing fire, towering over the battlefield as a living monument to deceit. The Blood Ravens met this unholy abomination with the righteous fury of the Emperor. Gabriel Angelos, captain of the Third Company, led a desperate charge directly into the heart of the swirling warp storm. Bolter shells and chainswords battered against the demon prince, bleeding its unnatural vitality. Yet it was the holy demon hammer, God-splitter, gifted by the Inquisition, that claimed the final victory. Angelos delivered a crushing blow that banished Sindri screaming back into the Immaterium. The battlefield fell quiet, leaving only the silence of the dead and the maddening rhythmic hum of the Maledictum. Here, the chronicle must pause to examine the philosophical tragedy of the Adeptus Astartes. Forged as the ultimate weapons of mankind, Space Marines carry the genetic legacy of the Emperor and his Primarchs. This physical and mental perfection frequently breeds a fatal arrogance. They believe their enhanced minds are impenetrable fortresses, wholly immune to the subtle whispers that corrupt lesser mortals. An Astartes looks upon the raw, weeping sickness of chaos and thinks he can control the outcome through sheer force of will and martial prowess. They forget that pride was the very poison that initiated the Horus heresy and fractured the galaxy 10 millennia ago. Believing they can outsmart the primordial annihilator, they walk willingly into snares set by dark gods. They mistake their unyielding stubbornness for divine clarity. Farseer Macha of the Eldari recognized the terrible snare laid before them on Tartarus. She looked upon the black stone of the Maledictum and saw it not as a chaotic weapon to be destroyed, but as a locked cage. Within that prison resided a nightmare far older and far worse than any Alpha Legion sorcerer. The Farseer demanded the artifact be left utterly undisturbed, warning that breaking it would doom them all. She knew the Inquisition could quarantine the planet, purge the surface, and bury the evil forever beneath orbital fire. Gabriel Angelos refused to listen. Blinded by the absolute certainty of his own righteousness, the Bloodraven believed he alone held the authority to end the threat. He viewed the alien's caution as treacherous deceit. Angelos raised God-splitter high above the cursed stone, channeling his fury and his chapter's hubris into the head of the great hammer. The weapon fell with the weight of absolute catastrophic conviction. The black stone shattered into 1,000 jagged fragments, echoing across the ruin of Tartarus with the deafening crack of a broken seal. From the glittering dust of the Maledictum, a crimson shadow spilled outward, an ancient demon tasting the air of real space for the first time in an aeon. The shattered fragments of the Maledictum rained upon the cracked earth of Tartarus, each jagged stone weeping unnatural blood. From the ruin of the cursed artifact, a monstrous consciousness clawed its way into the physical universe. The atmosphere turned to ash and raw copper in the lungs of Gabriel Angelos. A greater demon of Khorne stood triumphant before the captain of the Blood Ravens. It was a towering engine of butchery, wreathed in the suffocating heat of the Immaterium and armed with blades that had tasted the souls of dead worlds. Gabriel tightened his grip upon his thunderhammer, bracing his augmented frame for the inevitable violence of a final, desperate stand. The fatal blow never arrived. The beast did not raise its weapons against the solitary Space Marine. Instead, the monstrosity leaned downward, its burning eyes locking onto the Astartes with terrifying amusement. When the creature spoke, its voice was a grinding avalanche of malice that bypassed mortal hearing to echo directly within Gabriel's skull. It did not roar a chaotic challenge. It offered gratitude. The demon thanked Gabriel Angelos. It praised the Blood Ravens for their fatal arrogance, sneering at how their relentless pursuit of hidden truths had served only to shatter its ancient chains. The entity savoured the irony of an Imperial champion acting as the architect of his own damnation. With a sound like tearing silk, the abomination carved a bleeding wound in the fabric of reality and plunged back into the warp to begin its new slaughter. Gabriel remained frozen in the suffocating silence. The terrible magnitude of his error descended upon him like the crushing pressure of a dying star. He had purged an entire planet to contain a localized infection, only to willingly unleash a galactic horror that would butcher untold billions in the name of the blood god. This single, horrific moment became the absolute fulcrum upon which the future of his entire brotherhood now teetered. The defining characteristic of the Blood Ravens had betrayed them. Their obsessive search for esoteric knowledge and buried history had not brought enlightenment, but absolute ruin. They had stared too deeply into the darkest corners of the galaxy, and the darkness had thanked them for the view. Damnation carries a long shadow. The permanent paranoid gaze of the Inquisition immediately locked onto the chapter. Agents of the Ordo Hereticus and the Ordo Malleus began to document every movement, every deployment, and every secretive ritual of the fleet-based Adeptus Astartes. Suspicion poisoned their legacy. Rather than retreat from the edge of the precipice, the chapter desperately sought to right their monumental wrong by burying themselves deeper in the hunt for forgotten lore. This fatal flaw remained a rot in their genetic inheritance. Their compulsion to uncover forbidden relics would soon drive them straight into the heart of another doomed system, where their unyielding pride would dictate the terms of their next agonizing catastrophe. Tartarus bred a fatal arrogance that would soon bear rotten fruit on the contested world of Kronus. Blood and ash choked the skies of this former paradise long before the arrival of the Adeptus Astartes. The Imperial Guard of the first Kronus Liberators were already locked in a desperate war of attrition against the burgeoning Tau Empire and the newly awakened Necrons. They fought and died by the millions in the name of the God Emperor, holding the line in trenches filled with their own dead. Salvation seemed to manifest when the drop pods of the Blood Ravens tore through the stratosphere. Instead of deliverance, the sky fell to herald the true tragedy of the Dark Crusade. Captain Davian Thule marched upon the command bunkers of the Imperial Guard not as a savior, but as an executioner. His orders from the chapter command were absolute and devoid of mercy. The Space Marines did not offer reinforcements to the battered human defenders. They delivered a cold, uncompromising ultimatum. Thule commanded the first Kronus Liberators to stand down, abandon their fortifications, and evacuate the planet immediately. For loyal soldiers who had bled for every inch of Kronian soil, such an order was indistinguishable from madness. The Guard commanders refused to surrender the world they had sworn to reclaim. Negotiations ended at the barrel of a bolter. The Blood Ravens turned their righteous fury away from the Xenos threat and unleashed it upon their fellow servants of the Imperium. Mass reactive shells tore through the flak armor of the very men and women who had just cheered the arrival of the Space Marines. Astartes' chainswords revved and chewed through bunkers filled with confused, terrified guardsmen who could not fathom why the Angels of Death had come to murder them. Thule executed his grim duty without hesitation, systematically dismantling the Imperial military apparatus on Kronus. Lehman Russ battle tanks were ripped apart by melter fire, and lines of infantry were crushed beneath the tread of Space Marine dreadnoughts. The reason for this fratricidal slaughter was buried deep beneath the corpses of loyal heroes. Deep within the crust of Kronus lay ancient chapter relics and forbidden histories dating back to the dawn of the Imperium. The Blood Ravens harbored a terrified obsession with their own unknown origins. They would rather butcher an entire regiment of the Imperial Guard than allow the Inquisition or any outsider to lay eyes upon these buried secrets. Paranoia eclipsed duty, transforming the revered protectors of humanity into silent butchers. Victory on Kronus was purchased with the blood of innocents and the souls of the perpetrators. The first Kronus Liberators were utterly annihilated. Their commanders were cut down in the fury of battle, their banners broken, and their planetary campaign erased by the demigods they worshipped. Davian Thule claimed the world for his chapter, securing the relics beneath a shroud of martial silence and planetary bombardment. Yet the sheer scale of the atrocity left a permanent, festering wound on the spirit of the Blood Ravens. They had proven that no cost in loyal lives was too high to maintain their clandestine legacy. This violent obsession pushed the chapter further into the moral abyss, forging a dark template for the future. They now stood as a brotherhood willing to slaughter their own allies to keep the galaxy blind to their past. The ash of Kronus settled upon armor, painted in the blood of loyal servants of the Emperor. Lucas Alexander, governor militant of the Imperium, lay dead by the hands of the Adeptus Astartes. The Blood Ravens had claimed their victory over the desolate world, but the price of their triumph was a wholesale slaughter of true and faithful guardsmen. Captain Davian Thule stood as the architect of this fratricide, his absolute devotion to his chapter, overriding the sacred bonds of Imperial brotherhood. He ordered the bodies of the fallen soldiers treated with honor, a hollow penance for the cold execution of his rightful allies. The surface of Kronus belonged to the Blood Ravens, yet the true prize lay buried far beneath the scorched and cratered earth. Far below the shattered crust of the planet, ancient catacombs waited in unbroken darkness. Thule descended into these forgotten vaults, guided by whispers of his chapter's deliberately obscured past. His path led him through crumbling archways and dust-choked corridors untouched by human steps for millennia. Here, hidden from the gaze of the Inquisition and the wider Imperium, he found the relics. Tattered banners bearing the earliest heraldry of the Blood Ravens hung from the shadowed walls, their threads rotting in the stale air. Armor plates of ancient mark lay scattered across the cold stone, etched with designations that matched no known archive in the librarium. This was a graveyard of their own history, a vault of truths deliberately excised from the minds of the chapter. At the heart of the ruins rested a singular reliquary, holding archaic data scrolls and crumbling vellum. Thule broke the ancient seals and read the words inscribed within. Veterans standing vigil outside the chamber would later recount the absolute, suffocating silence that fell over their revered commander. The color drained from his weathered face, leaving him as pale as a corpse in the gloom of the crypt. Whatever truth was written on those fragile pages shattered the very foundations of his faith. Did he see the true name of their unknown Primarch, cursed and branded as a traitor by the master of mankind? Did he uncover proof of some deep, festering corruption woven into their gene seed since the dark days of the Horus heresy? The chronicles do not say, for Thule spoke no word of his agonizing discovery. He emerged from the vault a changed and deeply haunted man. Without a moment of hesitation, he ordered the absolute destruction of the catacombs. Melter charges and orbital bombardments collapsed the ancient ruins, burying the relics and the scrolls under millions of tons of jagged bedrock. Kronus was sealed forever, quarantined by the grim command of a captain desperate to bury the sins of his ancestors. Thule bore the crushing weight of that terrible secret alone, locking the knowledge behind walls of unyielding silence. Yet the shadows awakened on Kronus refused to remain buried. This hidden shame acted as a poison in the veins of the chapter, setting them on a frantic path of desperate campaigns and compounding failures. The curse of their hidden origins would soon drag them from this bloody victory directly into the jaws of the most catastrophic slaughter they had ever faced. Victory on Kronus tasted of ash, but the calamity that awaited in the Kaurava system tasted only of blood and foolish pride. Force Commander Indrik Boreal led 5 companies of the Blood Ravens into a chaotic war zone spanning 4 planets and 3 moons. Pride clouded his tactical judgment from the moment the strike cruisers broke warp. Boreale envisioned a glorious execution of a doctrine he called simultaneous multi-planet strikes. He ordered his forces dispersed across the vast system, splitting his companies into fractured deployments intended to overwhelm the enemy with localized superiority. Instead, he orchestrated a masterpiece of military incompetence. Divided and unsupported, the Blood Ravens were systematically isolated. Hostile forces ranging from Xenos hordes to the corrupted legions of the ruinous powers exploited the massive gaps in the Space Marine lines. Boreal refused to adapt, screaming orders for steadfast defense even as his drop zones were overrun and his supply lines severed. The doctrine of massed shock assault was abandoned in favor of static, indefensible holdings. Veterans of centuries fell not in glorious melee, but cut down in muddy trenches, abandoned by a command structure entirely detached from the reality of the slaughter. Boreal himself perished in the final days of the campaign, his death serving only as a bitter punctuation to the greatest military catastrophe in the recorded history of the chapter. When the surviving vessels finally tore their way back into the Immaterium, they carried a shattered brotherhood. Half of the entire chapter had been annihilated in the Kaurava system. 500 fully trained Adeptus Astartes were dead. The veteran companies were decimated, their irreplaceable Terminator suits left to rust on alien battlefields or looted by scavengers. Such a loss would cripple even a first founding chapter holding a secure homeworld. But for the Blood Ravens, it threatened outright extinction. Replacing 500 Space Marines is a logistical nightmare of terrifying proportions. A chapter operating as a fleet-based entity relies upon hidden recruiting worlds and scattered outposts entirely divorced from the standard supply lines of the Administratum. Gene seed extraction demands apothecaries recovering the progenoid glands from fallen brothers. On Kaurava, the dead were left behind, their sacred genetic legacy rotting in the mud. Without those glands, new initiates cannot be implanted. Furthermore, the armories of the Blood Ravens were drained of bolters, plasma incinerators, and power armor. Forging new war gear requires deep pacts with the Adeptus Mechanicus, pacts that take decades to fulfill. The chapter had neither the genuine reserves to breed new warriors nor the weapons to arm them. Bleeding, disgraced, and utterly depleted, the Blood Ravens retreated into the void to lick their wounds. They possessed barely enough strength to garrison their remaining strike cruisers. Defending their secret recruiting worlds was now an impossible task. In this hour of utter vulnerability, the galaxy offered them no respite, for the void had already begun to disgorge a new and ravenous shadow. The blood spilled in the Kaurava system had barely begun to dry when a new nightmare choked the stars of the Aurelia subsector. The Blood Ravens had returned to their recruiting worlds, a fractured brotherhood, their numbers halved and their armories depleted. They sought only the time to heal and rebuild their decimated companies. The universe offered them only the Great Devourer. It began not with invading armadas, but with a suffocating silence. The shadow in the warp fell across Aurelia like a psychic shroud, isolating the sector from the guiding light of the Astronomicon. Astropaths screamed as their minds were filled with the chittering alien static of the hive mind, their brains hemorrhaging from the sheer pressure of 1 trillion unified consciousnesses. Navigators convulsed, their third eyes burning as the Immaterium became an impenetrable hostile ocean of psychic white noise. Hive Fleet Leviathan had arrived. The Tyranid swarm did not merely conquer worlds, it digested them. Billions of Xenos organisms blackened the skies, raining down in mycetic spores that ruptured to unleash living weapons of razorbone and corrosive acid. The consumption process was an atrocity of biological engineering. Unending carpets of ripper swarms stripped flesh from bone, devoured the planetary flora, and drank the oceans dry before throwing their bloated bodies into boiling digestion pools. Vast, pulsating capillary towers pierced the atmosphere, pumping planetary nutrient slurry into the massive bioships orbiting above. These alien constructs left behind nothing but dead, airless spheres of barren rock. For the Blood Ravens, this was an absolute and existential death sentence. Calderis, Typhon Primaris, and Meridian were the very lifeblood of the chapter. These planets birthed the fierce, unbroken youths who would face the trials to become Adeptus Astartes. If these recruiting worlds were consumed, the Blood Ravens would wither away in a single generation, their glorious history erased from the galaxy forever. Thrust into this apocalyptic crucible was a newly promoted Force Commander, bearing the impossible weight of command over the battered remnants of the strike forces. Beside him stood stoic veterans like Sergeant Tarkus, a warrior who had witnessed the annihilation of entire armies, now forced to watch his home system drown in an endless tide of chitin and scything talons. This was a desperate, grinding war of attrition against an enemy that knew no fear, no fatigue, and no mercy. Every bolter shell fired was an irreplaceable resource, and every battle brother lost was a devastating blow to the chapter's razor-thin margins of survival. The Space Marines held the line in the shattered ruins of human cities and the toxic swamps of primal worlds, their power armor stained deep with alien ichor. These warriors fought with the raw, bleeding desperation of men defending their own graves. Yet as the strike teams bled for every inch of Aurelian soil, they looked upward to their high command for salvation. The surviving captains trusted in the ancient wisdom of their leaders to guide them through this encroaching twilight. The loyal Astartes placed their absolute faith in the supreme architect of their defense, a revered champion whose voice commanded absolute loyalty, entirely unaware of the malignant rot festering just behind his righteous decrees. Against the encroaching shadows of the Tyranid swarm stood a singular figure of absolute authority. Azariah Kyras orchestrated the defense of the sector with a mind that burned like a miniature star. He was the sovereign lord of the Blood Ravens, wielding martial command and devastating psychic might with equal fluency. His voice echoed across vox channels and telepathic choirs alike, a thunderous projection of unshakable conviction. Decades prior to this apocalyptic Xenos invasion, Kyras had been swallowed by the nightmare of the Judgement of Carrion. That accursed space hulk had vanished into the churning tides of the Immaterium, dragging the young librarian into a realm of pure madness. For years, his name was carved into the roll of the honored dead. Then came the miracle. Kyras walked out of the warp, his flesh intact, his soul seemingly untouched by the predatory entities of the Empyrean. He was heralded as a paragon of purity, a warrior whose faith had formed an impenetrable aegis against the dark. Upon his miraculous salvation, his ascent through the ranks was meteoric, driven by an awe-inspiring charisma and an intellect sharpened by unimaginable trials. He holds a mantle almost unheard of within the Adeptus Astartes. Azariah Kyras is both chapter master and chief librarian. Such a concentration of absolute power is inherently perilous. The Codex Astartes divides the spiritual, martial, and psychic burdens of leadership for a reason. A chief librarian channels the fickle, volatile energies of the warp, constantly fighting against the gnawing whispers of the abyss. A chapter master wields the unquestioned loyalty of 1,000 transhuman killers. To merge these two domains into one man is to place the entire destiny of a chapter upon a razor edge. Should that single pillar of strength crack, the resulting collapse would doom them all entirely. Yet the Blood Ravens did not see a man balancing on a precipice. They saw a savior. Battered by endless campaigns and bleeding from 1,000 wounds, the chapter looked upon Kyras as their undisputed deliverer. He stood before the Tyranid onslaught not just as a tactician, but as a living saint of war. Though he remained secluded within the Omnis Arcanum, his psychic decrees guided the strike forces against the unending waves of the Great Devourer. Under his absolute command, the disparate elements of the Blood Ravens forged a unified wall of bolter and blade, rallying around the myth of an invincible leader. Victory against the alien menace seemed assured beneath his guiding hand. The Tyranid swarms would eventually break against his unbreakable resolve. However, the galaxy is an unforgiving crucible, and the Immaterium never surrenders its prizes willingly. No mortal soul, regardless of its transhuman fortitude, spends years adrift in the warp and returns entirely whole. Behind the fiery sermons and the psychic majesty, something ancient and terrible festered in the deep recesses of his mind. The heroic facade concealed a slow, creeping corruption that had taken root decades ago aboard the Judgement of Carrion. While the chapter bled to secure their imminent triumph over the Xenos horde, a far more insidious poison prepared to bloom from within the very heart of their trusted leadership. Venom coursed through the synaptic web of the Great Devourer. The potent toxin deployed by the Blood Ravens shattered the hive-mind connection across the sub-sector. Monstrous ships convulsed in the upper atmosphere of the capital world, their immense carapaces rupturing as rapid necrosis consumed their living hulls. Meteors of burning flesh and chitin rained down upon the scorched earth, marking the chaotic death throes of the Tyranid tendril. Captain Gabriel Angelos and his strike force had delivered their promised salvation. The Xenos threat was utterly broken, yet the ashes of this triumph tasted only of bitterness and rot. There would be no celebration for the sons of the unknown Primarch. Strike forces of the Blood Ravens stood exhausted among mountains of alien corpses. Their ceramite armor was fractured, their bolter magazines were empty, and their veteran ranks were severely depleted. They had survived the crucible of the swarm, bleeding themselves dry to secure the safety of their crucial recruiting worlds. Respite is an illusion in the dark millennium. Before the smoke could even clear from the poisoned skies, the auger arrays of the orbiting strike cruisers screamed in binary terror. A harsh transmission ripped through the astropathic choirs, broadcasting a frequency composed of pure, unadulterated malice. The signal did not originate from the deep void, but from a nightmare resurrected. The ice world of Aurelia, the ancestral capital and jewel of the subsector, had violently torn its way back into real space. Centuries ago, an apocalyptic warp storm had swallowed the planet whole, dragging it screaming into the churning madness of the immaterium. It was a world mourned and forgotten, a frozen tomb erased from the Imperial registries. Now it hung in the void once more, its massive glaciers corrupted, its atmosphere howling with the dark and residual energies of the warp. Gargantuan warships of jagged iron and blasphemous geometry pierced the veil of real space around the returned sphere. The Black Legion had arrived. These were not mindless alien beasts driven by blind hunger, but the ancient lords of the Long War, the traitorous Adeptus Astartes, who had butchered their way across 10 millennia. Veterans of the Horus heresy, clad in obsidian and gold, descended upon the corrupted ice of Aurelia, eager to slaughter the weary loyalists who dared to stand in their path. A creeping dread settled over the exhausted Space Marines as they mobilized to face these ancient traitors. The timing of this massive invasion was entirely too perfect, the warp coordinates far too precise. The Black Legion had not simply stumbled across a subsector conveniently weakened by the Tyranid swarm. They marched with the grim purpose of guests attending a long-awaited feast. Someone had guided their vile fleet through the treacherous currents of the Empyrean. Someone had deliberately unlocked the gates of Aurelia and broadcast the dark signal across the stars. The architects of the Great Betrayal were not merely invading the home worlds of the Blood Ravens. They were answering an invitation. Frost and ash choke the atmosphere of Aurelia. The world that was once a pristine jewel of ice now bleeds the raw, rancid energy of the immaterium. Fissures split the glaciers, vomiting unnatural warp fire into the freezing winds. This is not merely a planetary invasion. The devastation is a desecration engineered from within. The Black Legion marches across the shattered ice fields with impossible precision. Their drop pods fall exactly where the Blood Ravens are weakest. Their ambushes anticipate every tactical shift. Gabriel Angelos and his strike force commanders soon uncover the terrifying truth behind this flawless prescience. The Arch-Enemy possesses current heavily encrypted Blood Raven command codes. These are not old ciphers scavenged from dead battlefields. They are active operational keys pulsing with the digital signature of the chapter itself. A suffocating dread settles over the strike force, heavier than the unnatural storms ravaging the world. Fighting the traitor legions of the Warp is the solemn duty of the Adeptus Astartes. Realizing the enemy was invited into their home by one of their own acts as a psychological poison, paranoia takes root in the hearts of the purest warriors. Brother looks upon brother through the red lenses of their visors, searching for the taint of betrayal. Every Vox transmission is scrutinized. Every tactical withdrawal is weighed as potential sabotage. Gabriel Angelos stands at the precipice of a nightmare. He is no stranger to the sting of treachery, having burned his own homeworld of Cyrene to purge its heresy. Yet this rot is different. It festers in the highest echelons of the chapter command. The enemy is not just wearing the midnight black of the despoilers, but the noble red of the blood ravens. The strike force bleeds on two fronts. Bolter and Chainsword clash against the relentless tide of Chaos Space Marines, while a silent, desperate war is waged to maintain faith in the chapter itself. Aurelia mirrors this internal decay. The ice world continues to thaw, weeping putrid fluids as reality breaks down. Demonic entities claw their way through the melting permafrost. The physical environment degrades in tandem with the holy brotherhood of the Blood Ravens. Suspicion threatens to accomplish what the Black Legion alone could not, unraveling the absolute unity required to hold the line against the dark. They need absolute proof before the chapter tears itself apart. The encrypted signals guiding the Black Legion must have a localized relay, a nexus of command directing the slaughter. Auspex sweeps pierce the tainted void around the dying planet. Deep orbital scans catch an immense distorted shadow drifting through the debris field of the Aurelian system. It is an amalgamation of dead ships and forgotten derelicts, pulled from the tides of the Warp. Somewhere within its decaying iron guts lies the origin of the traitorous broadcast. The Judgement of Carrion drifted through the void like a colossal monument to despair. Its twisted architecture was a grotesque amalgamation of 1,000 slaughtered vessels, crushed together by the merciless tides of the Immaterium. Shadows clung to every rusted bulkhead. The air inside the massive space hulk was frozen, foul and suffocating. Ghostly echoes reverberated down the ruined corridors, carrying the final screams of countless souls trapped within the warped metal. The strike force plunged into this floating tomb, their lumen beams cutting through centuries of stagnant gloom. This derelict held a dark and sacred significance for the Blood Ravens. Centuries ago, the Judgement of Carrion had claimed a massive expeditionary force. A young librarian named Azariah Kyras had been lost to its haunted depths, presumed dead, only to miraculously return years later. His survival had been celebrated as a triumph of the Emperor. Now that triumph revealed its true, rotting face. Deep within the abyssal bowels of the Hulk, the strike force discovered an entrenched stronghold. The Black Legion had claimed this rusted sanctuary. Desecrated shrines to the dark gods littered the compartment, built around archaic cogitator banks and shattered armor. The loyalist warriors fought through the treacherous heretics, bolter fire tearing through the corrupted air. Amidst the carnage, a lone tech marine extracted a heavily encrypted data slate from a defiled console. It was a relic of the chapter, an ancient log left behind during that fateful expedition centuries prior. The machine spirits of the device were agitated, fighting the decryption algorithms. Line by line, the cipher broke. The exact moment the encryption collapsed, the temperature in the room seemed to plummet. The glowing green text of the recovered missive cast a sickly light over the faces of the assembled Astartes. The words translated across the screen unraveled centuries of chapter history. It was a confession, penned in the hand of Apothecary Gallon, a brother who had stared into the abyss and surrendered. Azariah Kyras had not survived the Judgement of Carrion through faith or martial prowess. He had made a pact in the dark. Stranded, starving, and hounded by the horrors of the Warp, the young librarian had begged for salvation. An answer had slithered from the maw of a great unclean one. The demon of Nurgle, known as Ulka, offered Kyras life and power in exchange for his eternal servitude. The data slate laid bare the absolute damnation of their father and commander. Kyras had been a creature of chaos since his miraculous return, orchestrating the slow, methodical corruption of the chapter from its highest seat. Every sacrifice, every deployment, every bloody victory over the centuries had been manipulated by a hidden servant of the plague god. Silence descended upon the strike force as the full magnitude of the heresy settled into their bones. The traitor they hunted was not a rogue captain or a deluded initiate. The rot originated at the absolute zenith of their brotherhood. Their chapter master, the spiritual and military heart of the Blood Ravens, was an agent of the ruinous powers. The very foundation of their loyalty had been poisoned. A sacred oath binds an Astartes to his chapter master, an unbreakable chain of honor forged in blood and gene seed. Gabriel Angelos stared at the decrypted screen, feeling the weight of the galaxy crash down upon his armored shoulders. To save the Blood Ravens from total annihilation, he would have to commit an act of unthinkable treason. The path forward was paved with the blood of brothers, requiring him to turn his blade against the absolute authority of his own master. Gabriel Angelos stood at the precipice of an unthinkable abyss. The revelation of Azariah Kyras as a servant of chaos demanded an immediate and catastrophic response. Gabriel had to destroy the ultimate authority of his brotherhood to save the Blood Ravens. He declared himself a mutineer in the eyes of the law, to remain a loyalist in the eyes of the Emperor. This was no simple rebellion. It was a conscious descent into the absolute worst crime an Adeptus Astartes could commit. A Space Marine is not merely a soldier in power armor. He is a psycho-indoctrinated weapon forged through hypnotherapy, genetic alteration, and decades of relentless spiritual conditioning. Every initiate is neurologically hardwired to revere his chapter master as the living proxy of their Primarch and the Emperor himself. Disobedience is never a simple breach of protocol. It is a physiological anomaly, an act that shatters the very bedrock of an Astartes psyche. Raising a weapon against a chapter master requires an Adeptus Astartes to violently tear out the roots of his own existence. Standing on the opposite side of this fractured loyalty was Apollo Diomedes. As captain of the Honor Guard, Diomedes embodied the martial perfection and unyielding discipline of the Blood Ravens. He was a hero of immense stature, a noble warrior whose faith in the chain of command was absolute. That very nobility became his ultimate tragedy. Diomedes refused to look upon the rot at the highest echelon of his brotherhood. When confronted with the damning evidence against Kyras, the captain rejected it entirely. He saw only the immediate heresy of Gabriel Angelos. In the mind of Apollo Diomedes, Kyras was the chapter, and Angelos was a mad dog tearing at the throat of their sacred institution. The schism tore the Blood Ravens apart from within. Warriors who had bled together on 100 worlds now locked their targeting reticules upon one another. The agonizing reality of this civil war echoed through the corridors of their strike cruisers. Loyal Space Marines were forced to pull the trigger against equally loyal brothers, each believing they alone were saving the soul of the chapter. Mass reactive bolter rounds shattered crimson ceramite bearing identical heraldry. Diomedes rallied the bulk of the chapter forces to hunt down Angelos and his renegades. Blind duty transformed the honorable captain into the unwitting enforcer of a chaotic blight. By hunting the only men who saw the truth, Diomedes bought the corrupted chapter master the one resource he desperately required: time. While the Blood Ravens bled themselves white in a war of blind fratricide, Azariah Kyras turned his gaze back to the sector at large. The grand orchestration of carnage that had consumed the Aurelian subsector finally began to take shape. Every dead orc, every slaughtered Tyranid, and every fallen space marine had been a calculated sacrifice feeding a much darker design. Azariah Kyras wears many masks. The pestilent rot found aboard the Space Hulk was merely a convenient shroud, a foul misdirection meant to blind the Blood Ravens to the true depth of his treachery. He never served the Lord of Decay. The chapter master had long ago pledged his soul to a master far more violent, orchestrating a deception born decades prior on the doomed world of Tartarus. Cast your memory back to that fractured planet and the sorcerous artifact known as the Maledictum. Captain Gabriel Angelos struck the chaotic stone with his thunder hammer to deny the dark powers their prize. He believed he acted with righteous, unwavering fury. Instead, he unwittingly shattered a cage. A greater demon of Khorne erupted from the ruins of the Maledictum, freed into the materium by the strike of a loyalist hero. The warp-spawned monstrosity offered Gabriel a chilling whisper of gratitude before it vanished into the ether. That sinister thanks now echoes with horrifying clarity. Gabriel was not the demon's savior, but a pawn moved into position by Azariah Kyras. Trapped within the Tartarus artifact for centuries, the demon of Khorne had reached out through the currents of the warp to find a willing vessel. It found Kyras. The demon corrupted the chapter master from inside its ancient prison, whispering promises of immortal power, endless wrath, and galactic slaughter. Shattering the Maledictum was never a tragic accident. It was the absolute linchpin of an unfathomable grand design. With the daemon freed, the unholy pact was sealed. Azariah Kyras shed the last vestiges of his humanity and began to prepare an offering worthy of the blood god. Mere betrayal could never satiate Khorne. Ascension to demonhood demands an ocean of blood, and Kyras intends to drown an entire star system to achieve his dark apotheosis. Subsector Aurelia itself has been chosen as the altar. Every drop of blood spilled by the invading Tyranid swarms, every life claimed by the Black Legion, and every brother slain in the Blood-Raven's civil war feeds the ritual. Planetary defense forces are butchered in the billions. Entire hive cities are reduced to char, marrow, and bone. Kyras manipulated Xenos, heretic and loyalist alike, into a grinding, inescapable engine of endless massacre. The rampant slaughter across Aurelia is not a war of conquest, but a colossal sacrificial rite orchestrated from the highest seat of the chapter. Billions perish to fuel the ascension of a single monstrous traitor. The sheer scale of the carnage ripples violently through the immaterium, creating a blinding beacon of bloodshed that cannot be ignored. Such absolute devastation forces the hand of the Imperium itself. Cold, calculating eyes turn toward the dying subsector as the holy Ordos perceive the chaotic taint bleeding from the stars. The Inquisition descends upon Aurelia, carrying with them the ultimate sanction, prepared to escalate a fratricidal war into total planetary annihilation. The Immaterium tore open above the Aurelia subsector, vomiting forth the cold and featureless black hulls of the Holy Ordos. Inquisitor Adrastia had arrived to deliver the final judgment of the Ordo Hereticus upon a realm already choking on madness. Azariah Kyras intended to offer these besieged worlds as a titanic blood sacrifice to the ruinous powers. The Inquisition, acting with the merciless arithmetic of the Emperor, arrived to simply burn the entire sector to ash before that dark bargain could be completed. Adrastia did not deploy to offer salvation or lend reinforcements. She descended as a harbinger of absolute annihilation. Her decree fell upon the loyalist blood ravens like a falling executioner blade. She delivered a cold and calculated ultimatum, granting them a mere handful of days to cleanse their own ranks. They were ordered to hunt down their traitorous chapter master and rip the demonic infestation from the subsector by their own hands. Should they fail by a single hour, Adrastia promised to authorize a general exterminatus. Every planet, every moon, and every citadel in the Aurelian system would be scoured of organic life by a rain of cyclonic torpedoes and atmospheric incinerators. There would be no appeals and no exceptions. For Captain Gabriel Angelos, this ticking clock was an agonizing and inescapable echo of his deepest trauma. Centuries ago, a younger Gabriel had stood upon a strike cruiser in orbit above his own homeworld of Cyrene, calling upon the Inquisition to unleash its total destruction to halt the spread of an unstoppable heresy. He had carried the crushing guilt of that apocalyptic fire through every battle since. Now the unblinking eye of the Inquisition was fixed upon him, and the very same planet-cracking warheads were pointed directly at his entire chapter. The irony tasted like corpse ash in his mouth. The exact grim scenario that forged him was playing out once more, but this time the entire legacy of the Blood Ravens was laid upon the chopping block. If Gabriel could not execute his corrupted father in the Adeptus Astartes, his brothers would be erased from Imperial history just as thoroughly as the screaming citizens of Cyrene. The ultimatum left the Loyalists with no time for mourning or tactical deliberation. Inquisitorial warships were already locked in high orbit, their cogitators endlessly calculating firing solutions for a total system purge. Angelos rallied his battered strike forces, knowing the impossible nature of the siege ahead. To even lay eyes upon Azariah Kyras, they would first have to shatter the formidable defensive lines the chaptermaster had constructed. The hour of planetary execution approached with terrifying speed. Every step forward would require them to wade through the blood of manipulated space marines and corrupted planetary defenders, pushing them inexorably toward a tragic confrontation designed to strip the false master of his final shields. Storming the fastness of the Honor Guard required the blood of brothers. The Loyalists carved a path through the elite warriors of the Blood Ravens, striking down veterans who believed with absolute certainty that they fought for the Emperor. At the vanguard strode Captain Apollo Diomedes. For years he had been the unshakable sword of Chapter Master Azariah Kyras, the blunted instrument of a traitor's will. That blinding loyalty ended in the shadows of the central sanctum. Diomedes breached the sealed doors of the inner keep, expecting to find the holy relics of his chapter. Instead, he found an altar to the ruinous powers. Flayed skin hung from the statuary of the unknown Primarch. Octadic stars were smeared in dried blood across the marble floor. Here lay the corrupted shrine of Azariah Kyras. The truth slammed into the captain with the force of a thunderhammer. He had not been defending the honor of the Blood Ravens. He had been shielding a pawn of chaos. The magnitude of this betrayal was not merely political, but deeply personal and psychological. For years, Diomedes had been kept docile through the insidious ministrations of apothecary Galen. Under the guise of treating battle trauma, the corrupted apothecary had subjected the captain to subtle psychic brainwashing and narcotic conditioning. Galen wove cognitive blind spots into Diomedes' mind, forcing him to rationalize the escalating madness of Kyras and ignore the obvious rot festering within the chapter. Standing before the defiled altar, that artificial veil finally tore apart. The unmaking of Apollo Diomedes was a terrifying spectacle. The proud, bombastic commander died in that desecrated room. His worldview shattered completely, leaving only a hollow chasm of guilt and unutterable shame. He fell to his knees before the ruined icons, weeping tears of pure agony. Every order he had given, every loyal brother he had condemned, echoed in his mind as a damning indictment of his own foolishness. But Astartes are engineered to process trauma into violence. When Diomedes rose from the blood-stained floor, the weeping stopped. In its place burned a suicidal, hyper-violent fury. He stripped away his ceremonial honors and threw himself into the fray with a desperation that unnerved even the battle-hardened loyalists. Gone were the days of tactical withdrawal. Gone was the commander who would call out for aid when pinned beneath overwhelming fire. Diomedes no longer cared if he survived. He actively courted death, demanding that the enemies of the Emperor try to claim his ruined life. He swung his thunderhammer with apocalyptic rage, shattering the corrupted honor guard in a frantic bid for atonement. This solitary crusade of vengeance tore the final defenses of the stronghold to shreds. Diomedes became a walking avatar of destruction, drowning his sins in the gore of the traitors who had manipulated him. His absolute disregard for his own safety ripped a wide breach through the enemy lines. Through this corridor of carnage, the Loyalists pushed forward into the heart of the sector. The surviving Blood Ravens marched out of the shattered fortress and turned their eyes toward the surface of a dead world. The architect of their misery awaited them, ready to initiate the final stage of his ascendance on a battlefield steeped in ancient tragedy. Azariah Kyras does not flee randomly into the void. He charts a deliberate course to the one place in the galaxy that will inflict the most profound psychological torment upon Gabriel Angelos. The traitor chapter master descends upon Cyrene. Once a jewel of the Blood Raven's recruiting worlds, it is now nothing more than a dead, ash-choked sphere of fused glass and lingering sorrow. Decades ago, a younger Captain Angelos looked upon the insidious corruption taking root in his own home and commanded the Imperial Navy to unleash exterminatus. Atmospheric incinerators and cyclonic torpedoes scoured the biosphere to bedrock. Now, the returning loyalists march across immense plains of blackened trinitite. Crumbled husks of hive spires claw at the poisoned sky like the skeletal fingers of the damned. Among these whispering ruins lie the pulverized remnants of the very streets where Gabriel played as a child. He is forced to wade through the graveyard of his own making, breathing the microscopic dust of billions he condemned to the fire. This is the brilliant cruelty of the traitor's final gambit. Kyras wields the atrocity of Cyrene not just as a defensive redoubt, but as a philosophical weapon aimed directly at Gabriel's soul. His psychic broadcasts echo across the desolate wastes, mocking the righteous fury of the loyalists. Kyras taunts Angelos with the bitter truth that the Inquisition's ultimate sanction merely fed the blood god. The billions exterminated in the name of the Emperor were simply skulls for the skull throne, offered up by a loyal servant blind to the true nature of the universe. Gabriel sought to purge the demonic, yet his apocalyptic decree saturated the very bedrock of Cyrene with enough psychic agony to easily tear the veil asunder. Standing amidst the epicenter of this planetary grave, Azariah Kyras commences his blasphemous ritual. He does not need to slaughter millions to power his ascension. The death is already here, perfectly preserved in the scorched crust of the murdered world. Kyras acts as a conductor to a symphony of ancestral agony, drawing up the latent warp echoes of the incinerated populace. The sky bleeds a bruised, unnatural red as the immaterium spills into real space. Warp storms vortex above the glassed plains, answering the call of a mortal who has successfully orchestrated sector-wide butchery. Flesh melts and bones expand as the ruinous powers reward their architect. Kyras sheds his humanity entirely, drinking deep from the well of Gabriel's greatest sin, to swell into a hulking, horned demon prince of Khorne. The master of the Blood Ravens has become the ultimate manifestation of endless, senseless slaughter. Through the swirling ash and warp lightning, Gabriel Angelos prepares to march upon the beast. The ghosts of the past have materialized from the ash to exterminate the Blood Ravens, leaving only one path forward through the ruins of a murdered home. Ash rained upon the scarred crust of Cyrene as the immaterium bled into reality. The ritual of Azariah Kyras reached its cataclysmic apex, feeding upon the endless slaughter of the subsector to tear the veil completely asunder. Reality buckled with a deafening crack. From the blinding rupture in the materium emerged a creature born of pure malice and unfettered wrath. Kyras was no longer a space marine, nor was he merely a corrupted librarian. He had ascended to the dark pantheon, transformed into a colossal, winged demon prince of Khorne. Blood-red scales armored his swollen, towering frame. Jagged horns crowned a visage twisted by eternal rage. The immense shadows cast by his leathery wings choked the dying light of the dead world. The power radiating from the monstrosity was a tangible weight, a crushing psychic gravity that threatened to extinguish the sanity of any mortal who dared to witness his rebirth. Gabriel Angelos did not falter. He hefted the demon hammer God-Splitter, its ancient power field crackling with golden lightning against the encroaching gloom. With a battle cry that defied the doom before him, the captain charged his former master. He hurled himself at the warp-born beast that had orchestrated the long, slow ruination of the Blood Ravens. This strike was meant to be the culmination of a lifelong crusade. the righteous vengeance of a loyal son executing a traitorous father. There was no glory to be found upon the ashes of Cyrene. This was no duel of heroes, it was a massacre. The disparity in power between the mortal warrior and the ascended entity was absolute. Kyras barely registered the roaring assault of the Space Marine. With a single dismissive sweep of a massive clawed hand, the demon prince intercepted the charging captain. The blow struck with the kinetic fury of an orbital bombardment. Blessed ceramite shattered like brittle glass. Gabriel was swatted from his trajectory, his armor cratered and useless. Before the ruined captain could even strike the ground, Kyras was upon him. The monster discarded all martial discipline, fighting only with the crude, overwhelming brutality demanded by the blood god. Talons the size of power swords tore through Gabriel. Bones snapped with sickening reports that echoed across the desolate plains. Kyras seized his former pupil, crushing Gabriel's spine in a single agonizing grip. Limbs were wrenched from their sockets, flesh and muscle rended with effortless cruelty. Gabriel Angelos was physically unmade, reduced to a broken, bleeding husk in a matter of seconds. The mighty commander who had saved entire sectors was utterly dismantled by the monster his chapter's dark secrets had nurtured. Kyras cast the shattered remnants of the captain into the dust like broken refuse. The demon prince threw back his horned head and roared his triumph to the bleeding skies, reveling in the invincibility of his immortal form. Total victory seemed completely assured. Yet even as Kyras celebrated his absolute supremacy, the surviving strike force looked upon the broken body of their beloved commander and realized that conventional warfare was no longer an option. If the ascended tyrant could not be defeated by the strength of Adeptus Astartes' arms, survival demanded a desperate gambit that would dwarf everything they had already lost. Gabriel Angelos fell, his body crushed and bleeding upon the blighted earth of Cyrene. The remaining strike force surged forward to fill the void left by their broken commander. Bolt shells, melter blasts, and overcharged plasma fire tore into the ascending demon flesh of Azariah Kyras. In the heavens above, the litanies of targeting algorithms completed their holy work. An orbital lance strike pierced the blackened clouds, a pillar of searing white judgment that bathed the monstrous chapter master in stellar fire. The demon prince did not merely die. The chaotic energies anchoring his immense bloated mass to real space violently collapsed inward. Flesh warped and tore as the immaterium claimed its due, imploding with a shockwave of psychic force that scoured the battlefield. Kyras dissolved into a shrieking vortex of foul warp flame, leaving nothing behind but a crater of glassy slag and the fading echoes of demonic screams. Silence finally reclaimed the blasted wasteland. The Aurelia subsector was delivered from the brink of annihilation. In high orbit, Inquisitor Adrastia watched the corrupted taint dissipate from her auger arrays and formally stayed her hand. She called off the exterminatus that had hung over the worlds like an executioner's blade. The Inquisition was satisfied, but the blood ravens found no joy in their salvation. They stood victorious amidst the ash of their own making, a chapter entirely hollowed out by betrayal. Their supreme commander, the man who had guided their tactical doctrines and spiritual catechisms for over a century, had been an agent of the arch-enemy. Half of their remaining battle brothers lay dead across the scarred systems of Aurelia, victims of a shadow war fought within their own ranks. Decades of hard-won relics and irreplaceable war gear had been ground into the mud. The chapter was bleeding out, spiritually and physically crippled by the sheer scale of the fratricide required to purge the rot from their inner circle. At the center of this profound devastation lay Gabriel Angelos. His power armor was a ruin of shattered ceramite, exposed cabling, and twisted servos. His flesh was utterly broken, his primary organs failing under the catastrophic trauma inflicted by the ascended demon. His breathing was reduced to a wet, rattling gasp that bubbled with dark blood. The apothecaries who knelt beside the crater found a mangled corpse clinging to the mortal plane by the thinnest thread of sheer, unyielding will. Gabriel had sacrificed his own flesh to buy his brothers the opening they needed, paying the ultimate price to undo the sins of his master. The surviving Astartes carefully lifted his ruined form from the toxic dirt. Their twin hearts were heavy with the knowledge that their greatest living hero was all but dead. They carried his broken body toward the waiting gunships, leaving the ashes of their past scattered across Cyrene, marching blindly into a dark and uncertain future. The Daemon Prince Azariah Kyras was dead, but the victory demanded a terrible toll. Gabriel Angelos lay broken upon the scorched earth of Cyrene, his flesh pulverized and his bones ground to dust by the sheer warp-fueled mass of his former master. By all established doctrines of the Adeptus Astartes, such catastrophic trauma warranted immediate internment within the armored sarcophagus of a dreadnought. Angelos refused the eternal sleep. Through a supreme exertion of will and bottomless rage, he commanded the apothecaries and tech marines to forge him anew. They stripped away the ruined remnants of his mortal shell. In their place, they grafted cold iron, blessed archaeotech, and heavy bionics. Servos whined, and hydraulic musculature locked into place where human sinew once strained. Gabriel emerged from the apothecarian not as a preserved relic, but as a towering cyborg warlord. This resurrection killed the idealistic knight of Tartarus. The man who once agonized over the moral weight of Exterminatus was replaced by a grim, pragmatic master of war. Gabriel walked with a heavy, thudding gait, wielding his demon-smashing hammer with mechanical precision and furious strength. His face, half rebuilt with stark metallic plating, mirrored the hardened soul within. He now ruled over a chapter of ghosts. The Blood Ravens were decimated, their veteran companies slaughtered, their fleet crippled, and their honor stained black. Gabriel took up the mantle of chapter master, because there was no one else left with the strength to bear it. The wider Imperium does not easily forgive a tainted bloodline. When a chapter master falls to the ruinous powers, the stain of that betrayal bleeds into every space marine under his command. Kyras had not merely turned traitor, he had corrupted the highest echelons of the Blood Ravens from within, twisting their secretive nature into a shield for heresy. In the eyes of the Inquisition, the entire chapter was now inherently suspect. Ordo Hereticus agents embedded themselves in the subsector, their augury arrays trained on the Blood Ravens' every deployment. Sister chapters, once bound by oaths of mutual defense, turned their auspexes away and closed their strike cruisers to Gabriel emissaries. The High Lords of Terror tolerate no potential vectors of chaos, and many argued that the Blood Ravens should share the fate of the condemned. Gabriel understood the precarious edge upon which his chapter balanced. He accepted the watchful eyes of the Inquisition and the silent judgment of the Adeptus Terror. Survival now demanded absolute, unquestionable loyalty demonstrated through merciless prosecution of the Emperor enemies. There could be no more philosophical debates, no more lingering doubts, and no more leniency. The cyborg chapter master organized his depleted forces, combining broken squads and refitting battered strike cruisers. He pointed his heavily augmented gauntlet toward the dark stars, charting a new crusade. The Blood Ravens would bleed for their redemption, hurling themselves into the most desperate war zones the galaxy had to offer. Their ultimate test was already aligning in the Immaterium, drawing them toward the wandering ice world of Acheron, and a massive slaughter that would either forge their salvation or finally eradicate their name. Gabriel Angelos wore the mantle of chapter master, but his dominion was a shattered brotherhood. The Blood Ravens were bled white by the treachery of Azariah Kyras and the grueling campaigns across the Aurelian subsector. Their armories stood half empty, their reputation heavily stained by the heresy of their former leaders. Desperation breeds a dangerous hunger within the Adeptus Astartes. When the wandering ghost world of Acheron tore its way out of the warp, returning to real space after millennia, it brought rumors of a prize beyond measure. Buried deep within its ice and rock lay the Spear of Cain, a mythical weapon forged from the essence of the Eldari god of murder. Any rational observer would look upon the bloody history of the Blood Ravens and scream for caution. The demonic horrors of Tartarus and the festering corruption of Kyras were born directly from this obsessive pursuit of forbidden relics. Yet the sons of the unknown Primarch were prisoners of their own nature. The urge to hoard the esoteric, to claim the ancient and the arcane, is a compulsion etched deeply into their genetic code. They had learned absolutely nothing from the mountains of corpses left behind in previous decades. Angelos marshaled his battered fleet and ordered an immediate strike on Acheron, throwing his surviving brothers into the meat grinder for the sake of yet another magical trinket. The frozen crust of the wandering planet quickly became a vast abattoir. The Blood Ravens did not step onto an empty tomb world, but into a chaotic theatre of total annihilation. Farseer Macha led a desperate host of Asuriani, determined to reclaim the fragment of their war god before the crude hands of humanity could defile it. Descending simultaneously from the stars came the deafening roar of the Orcs, united under the brutal cunning of warlord Gorguts. The Greenskins cared nothing for ancient prophecies or divine weaponry, drawn only by the promise of endless slaughter against worthy foes. Drop pods shattered the glacial wastes, raining explosive bolter fire upon shrieking shuriken platforms and crude scrap metal engines. Gabriel fought at the forefront of the carnage, his massive thunder hammer crushing Xenos skulls with unyielding fury. Every drop of Astartes' blood spilled on the ice was a desperate sacrifice to a madness the chapter refused to acknowledge. They pushed relentlessly deeper into the colossal planetary vaults, entirely blinded by the radiant promise of the spear. The Blood Ravens truly believed this singular alien artifact would somehow restore their honor and refill their shattered arsenals. Their obsessive hunger deafened them to the psychic screams echoing beneath the frost. Artifacts of such immense cosmic violence never simply wait in the dark to be claimed by passing conquerors. They are always a trap, dangled by cosmic entities that feed on the arrogant hubris of mortal warriors. As Angelos and his battle brothers battered their way toward the inner sanctum, the psychic resonance of Acheron began to violently shift, masking a far older and infinitely more malevolent presence stirring beneath the vault. The frozen crust of Acheron ruptured as the Blood Ravens finally laid hands upon their coveted prize. The Spear of Cain pulsed with ancient energy, promising unparalleled martial might to the sons of the unknown Primarch. Instead of a divine weapon, they found a lock. The artifact was a psychic cage, and their relentless pursuit had provided the exact catalyst needed to break its ancient seals. Reality screamed and tore apart in a tempest of boiling blood and rusted brass. From the shattered heart of the vault emerged a massive bloodthirster, a greater demon of Khorne that had been imprisoned beneath the ice for millennia. Hellfire washed over the ranks of the Adeptus Astartes, incinerating the vanguard in an instant. Chapter Master Gabriel Angelos watched the slaughter with a heavy, sickening familiarity. Through the smoke and the roars of the warp-spawned monstrosity, a dark revelation took root in his mind. The chapter had not driven the Acheron campaign through tactical brilliance or righteous fury. They had been led by a leash of their own forging. Decades prior, on the cursed world of Tartarus, the Alpha Legion sorcerer Sindri Mir had used the chapter's obsessive thirst for hidden knowledge to orchestrate their downfall. Now on Acheron, the architects of chaos had played the exact same melody to make the Blood Ravens dance. Their veneration of lost lore and their insatiable greed for esoteric artifacts made them fundamentally predictable. The enemy did not need to outmaneuver the Blood Ravens on the battlefield. They only needed to dangle a powerful relic in the darkness and wait for the Space Marines to blindly charge into the snare. Bolter fire and chainswords met the demonic tide in a desperate bid for survival. Angelos marshaled his surviving forces, anchoring the defensive line with his own broken body and his indomitable will. They fought with the feral desperation of betrayed men, matching the fury of the bloodthirster blow for blow. By the time the greater demon was finally banished back into the immaterium, the caverns of Acheron were choked with the shattered armor of fallen brothers. The Blood Ravens achieved victory in the most technical, hollow sense of the word. No grand weapon was secured for their vast reliquary. No hidden truth of their forgotten origins was illuminated. They walked away from the frozen world with nothing but staggering casualties and a reinforced reputation as reckless, hoarding magpies who would gamble entire sectors for a scrap of ancient power. The chapter fleet limped away from Acheron, bearing a humbled and severely depleted fighting force. Gabriel Angelos knew the Blood Ravens could not sustain such mindless attrition. Their secretive ranks were failing, bleeding out in pointless quests, orchestrated by laughing gods. The galaxy around them was fracturing, tearing itself apart in the violent birth pangs of the Great Rift. Survival in this darkening age would require more than scavenged trinkets and stolen prophecies. The entire Imperium stood upon the precipice of annihilation. Yet in the deepest vaults of Mars, a slumbering genetic miracle was preparing to rewrite the very foundation of the Adeptus Astartes, bringing a profound transformation that would soon sweep across the bleeding stars. Nightmare swallowed the galaxy as the Great Rift tore the void asunder, yet from that absolute darkness emerged a blinding, terrifying light. The Indomitus Crusade battered its way through the warp storms, bringing the avenging sun back to a dying Imperium. For the Blood Ravens, bleeding and diminished after the harrowing slaughter of the Acheron campaign, salvation arrived not in the crimson of their brothers, but in the auric gold of the Emperor's own guardians. Massive strike vessels of the Adeptus Custodes translated from the Immaterium, their prows breaking the vacuum above the battered chapter fleet. Primarch Guilliman had dispatched his emissaries across the stars to deliver the Primaris miracle. When the 10,000 stepped onto the hangar decks of the Omnis Arcanum, the air turned to ice. Salvation wore the face of ultimate judgment. No chapter in the Adeptus Astartes hoards secrets with the ravenous hunger of this lineage. Deep within the stasis vaults of their battle barges lay relics of unspeakable provenance, artifacts liberated from the shadows of history. Among these hidden treasures were master-crafted weapons, ancient dreadnought chassis, and even suits of auric armor that bore a treasonous resemblance to the warplate of the Custodes themselves. The leadership of the chapter stood before the demigods of terror, their hearts pounding a steady, nervous rhythm beneath their ceramite plating. Every sweep of a golden helm, every lingering gaze upon a sealed blast door, felt like the prelude to an execution order. The Blood Ravens waited for the halberds to drop, paralyzed by the dread that the Emperor's watchmen had come not to reinforce a loyal chapter, but to audit a den of thieves. The unspoken paranoia was suffocating, a heavy silence that weighed upon every battle brother present. The execution never came. The Custodes did not ignite their guardian spears, nor did they demand the keys to the reliquaries. Instead, they presented the gift of the torchbearer fleets, transferring the sacred Primarch Genecraft entrusted to Belisarius Coil and the towering ranks of Grey-Shield Primaris Space Marines into the chapter's care. The Golden Giants departed as abruptly as they had arrived, leaving behind a cold, breathless relief that echoed through the fleet. Yet the arrival of these new warriors brought an entirely new shadow to the chapter. The Primaris Marines stood a full head taller than the firstborn, engineered by Belisarius Coil with a purity that defied 10 millennia of genetic degradation. Apothecaries of the chapter immediately turned their Auspex scanners upon their new brethren, desperate to unravel the biological truths locked within their veins. The influx of fresh, uncorrupted gene seed presented a profound paradox for a brotherhood that had never known the true identity of its founding Primarch. They possessed the means to replenish their decimated companies, but they now faced the daunting task of blending pristine creations with their own obsessively secretive nature. Gabriel Angelos lies upon the blood-stained slab of the Apothe Carrion, yielding his shattered form to the chirurgeons. He is a warrior comprised more of scarred adamantium and bionic reconstruction than original flesh. Crossing the Rubicon Primaris is a lethal gamble for any firstborn Marine, but for the chapter master of the Blood Ravens, It is a prolonged, agonizing disassembly. His mechanical limbs are disconnected. His augmetic organs are excised to make room for the Belisarian furnace, the sinew coils, and the Magnificat. The surgery is a relentless violation of a body already pushed beyond the limits of mortal endurance. Gabriel does not subject himself to this torture out of a desire for greater personal strength. He embraces the agony to lead by example. The newly arrived Primaris reinforcements stand as towering strangers within the chapter, viewed with deep suspicion by the veteran brothers. By offering his own ruined anatomy to the Ascension protocols, Gabriel proves to his warriors that this new gene seed is safe, pure, and truly belongs to the Blood Ravens. The divide between Firstborn and Primaris has sparked bitter tension across the Adeptus Astartes, but for this fleet-based brotherhood, the paranoia runs far deeper. The Blood Ravens have always suffered a unique genetic quirk, an unstable mutation rate that produces an unnatural abundance of powerful psychers. Belisarius Coil delivered pristine, stabilized genetic material to their fleet, supposedly purged of ancestral flaws. The chapter librarius watches these new giants with wary eyes, waiting to see if the psychic curse of their lineage will eventually manifest in Coil's immaculate creations, or if the ancient Archmagos has inadvertently erased the very soul of the chapter. Beneath this internal strife burns an infuriating reality. Coil forged this new generation of Blood Ravens using their original genetic template drawn from the deepest biological vaults of Mars. To stabilize their gene seed, the Archmagos had to study their foundational tithes. Belisarius Coil knows the identity of their Primarch. The ancient Martian cyborg holds the answer to the singular mystery that has defined, driven, and damned the Blood Ravens for millennia. He knows their absolute origin, yet he simply will not tell them. The truth remains locked away behind a wall of mechanical indifference, leaving the chapter to suffer in their endless search for a father they cannot name. On the apothecarium slab, Gabriel Angelos dies. His twin hearts flatline as the extreme trauma overwhelms his ravaged system. An agonizing moment of silence stretches across the surgical bay before the Belisarian furnace violently detonates, flooding his veins with hyperadrenals and forcing him back into the waking world. The chapter master rises from the metal table, reborn as a Primaris Marine. His survival seals the bond between the old guard and the new breed, proving that the Blood Ravens can evolve without losing their identity. The integration is complete, but even these flawless new bodies cannot outrun the darkness of their reputation. The galaxy holds a long memory, and the shadow of their past transgressions clings to their newly forged armor. The arcane science of the Primaris project now fortifies their physical forms, rewriting their transhuman physiology through the miracles of Archmagos Coil. Yet no amount of genetic alchemy can purify a tarnished name. The Adeptus Astartes are defined by brotherhood and honor, two currencies the Blood Ravens have thoroughly squandered in the eyes of the wider Imperium. They survived the treason of Azariah Kyras, but the shadow of their fallen chapter master stretches long over their current existence. To the High Lords of Terror and the greater military apparatus of humanity, they are broken tools. They are treated as second-class loyalists, permitted to exist only because the meat grinder of the current age demands every available bolter. The Ordo Hereticus holds their leash, and they pull it taut. Inquisitorial agents shadow the chapter fleet, monitoring every astropathic transmission and inspecting every drop pod manifest. Witch hunters watch the librarius with unblinking suspicion, waiting for the inevitable spark of corruption to ignite once more. The Blood Ravens operate under a perpetual sentence of unpronounced excommunication. Every victory is scrutinized for ulterior motives. Every casualty is recorded not as a heroic sacrifice, but as a potential sign of structural failing. They wear the purity seals of the Inquisition not as badges of faith, but as tracking collars clamped firmly around their throats. Any deviation from strict Imperial doctrine invites immediate and lethal censure. This suffocating oversight extends far beyond the judgment chambers of the Inquisition. Other Space Marine chapters actively refuse to fight alongside the sons of the unknown Primarch. When strike forces of the Blood Ravens arrive in a war zone, allied Astartes reposition their formations, deliberately maintaining void leagues of distance. Part of this cold shoulder stems from practical caution. The Magpies have a long, documented history of liberating priceless war gear from the armories of their allies, and no chapter master wishes to see his sacred relics vanish into the holds of a Blood Raven's strike cruiser. But the true reason for their isolation is far more spiritual in nature. The stench of a corrupted chapter master is an existential rot that takes millennia to fade. Brother chapters look upon the crimson armor and see only the ghosts of the warp and the whispering echoes of chaos that once plagued the halls of the Omnis Arcanum. Treason of that magnitude is a contagion, and the wider Adeptus Astartes treat the Blood Ravens as permanent carriers of the disease. Thus, the Blood Ravens wage a solitary crusade across a galaxy that despises them. They fight alone in the darkest corners of the Imperium, stripped of the fraternal bonds that sustain other warriors of their kind. They are orphans twice over, rejected by the society they bleed to protect and haunted by the sins of their own patriarchs. This absolute isolation breeds a desperate, gnawing hunger within the chapter cult. Cut off from the respect of their peers and the trust of terror, they turn their gaze inward. The watchful eyes of the Inquisition should dictate a period of quiet, subservient penance. Instead, the Blood Ravens continue to hoard the artifacts of the past with a feverish obsession. Beneath the punishing scrutiny of their overseers, a much deeper psychological compulsion drives them to risk total annihilation just to claim another relic. Reliquaries deep within the Omnis Arcanum overflow with the physical memory of other chapters. Row upon row of stasis vaults preserve war gear forged by hands that do not know them. A masterwork bolter bearing the inverted omega of the Ultramarines rests upon a velvet dais. Beside it lies a heavy adamantine gauntlet, etched with the Promethean cult markings of the Salamanders. Elsewhere, storm shields carrying the heraldry of the Dark Angels and chainswords belonging to the Imperial Fists lie perfectly preserved under lumen strips. These artifacts were not gifted, they were taken. Whispers and accusations follow the Blood Ravens wherever they deploy, branding them as thieves and scavengers. Other factions of the Adeptus Astartes view this obsessive acquisition as a gross failure of martial honor. The reality is far more tragic. The kleptomania of the Blood Ravens is the desperate symptom of a fundamentally broken psyche. Every chapter of the Adeptus Astartes anchors its core identity in the genetic and spiritual legacy of a Primarch. That foundational bedrock dictates their culture, their martial pride, and their undisputed place within the grand design of the Emperor. The Blood Ravens possess no such anchor. They drift in an abyssal void of their own ignorance, orphaned by a redacted past. A Space Marine is built to be a son. The Genocide is a biological chain linking the neophyte to a demigod of myth, giving them unquestioned authority to exist. Stripped of a father, the Blood Ravens suffer a profound, gnawing absence that threatens to consume their sanity. Hoarding the sacred relics of the wider Imperium serves as a necessary coping mechanism. Justifications are always fabricated to mask the theft. They claim a bureaucratic error in the administratum, a dire battlefield necessity, or a sacred duty to preserve ancient artifacts from encroaching Xenos. These lies are told not just to the Inquisition but to themselves. When a Blood Raven grips a power weapon once wielded by a recognized hero of the Imperium, he is not merely utilizing a tool of war, he is clutching at a borrowed lineage. By surrounding themselves with the venerated history of the first founding chapters, these orphans attempt to artificially graft themselves onto the unbroken tapestry of Imperial glory. They weave a patchwork identity from the stolen threads of other bloodlines. Deep within their twin hearts, they feel like cosmic impostors. They wear the ceramite of the Emperor, yet they lack the foundational mythos that makes a Space Marine whole. Acquiring a relic from a celebrated campaign they did not fight in allows them to pretend they belong to the wider brotherhood of angels. It is a continuous act of spiritual counterfeiting. The massive reliquaries of the chapter are not monuments to victory. They are monuments to a desperate, unrequited need for legitimacy. Every stolen banner and redirected suit of Terminator armor is a temporary bandage applied to a bleeding psychic wound. They amass mountains of external history to compensate for the gaping crater where their own history should be. Yet this towering fortress of borrowed glory provides only fleeting comfort against the encroaching dark. The quiet moments between campaigns offer no respite from the haunting questions that echo through their fortress monastery. They scour the galaxy for ancient data fragments, tearing apart forbidden archives and risking excommunication in a relentless search for their true origins. But beneath that frenzied quest for knowledge lurks a paralyzing dread of what waits at the end of the journey. Piles of stolen bolters and filched relics form a barricade against a creeping unspoken dread. The blood ravens scream their battle cry across the stars, declaring that knowledge is power and they must guard it well. That sacred maxim is a lie wrapped in self-delusion. They do not actually seek the ultimate truth of their existence. They flee from it with every warp jump and bloody crusade. Consider the suffocating silence within the deepest, most heavily warded sanctums of the Omnis Arcanum. It is a horrifying thought that the highest echelons of the librarium are not ignorant at all. The chief librarians and the chapter masters who ascend to those lonely peaks of command might already possess the exact answers the chapter bleeds to find. Down in the dark, they sift through locked data slates and forbidden Janisside ledgers, haunted by the terrifying phantom of who their true father might be. If the fragmented truths point to Magnus the Red, they point to a demon Primarch woven of raw warp stuff, shattered by tragic hubris, and forever chained to the Lord of Change. He is a demon Primarch woven of raw warp stuff, shattered by tragic hubris, and forever chained to the Lord of Change. To look upon that lineage is to realize that treason is written into their very DNA. It means acknowledging that their prodigious psychic gifts are not a blessed mutation guided by the Emperor, but the lingering curse of the Thousand Suns. Every spark of warp lightning cast from a blood-raven staff carries the phantom echoes of Prospero burning. The ancient horrors of their bloodline wait patiently in the dark. The flesh change, the rubric of Ahriman, and the inevitable descent into madness stalk the periphery of their collective soul. Such a truth is absolute poison to a loyal servant of the Imperium. An Inquisitor needs only a fraction of that evidence to declare an exterminatus and erase the entire chapter from Imperial history. Ignorance is therefore not a tragic failing. It is a desperate, calculated survival strategy designed by men crumbling under the weight of their own minds. The leaders of the Blood Ravens keep the rank and file perpetually occupied with endless scavenger hunts across the galaxy. They decree impossible quests to recover fragmented lore, Xenos artifacts, and lost swords. As long as the Battle Brothers are busy overturning rocks on dead worlds in the Aurelia subsector, they will not ask the truly dangerous questions. The relentless acquisition of artifacts from other Loyalist chapters is merely a frantic psychological distraction. Hoarding the history of the Ultramarines or the Dark Angels ensures there is no room left to examine their own. A space marine in perpetual motion, driven by the righteous fury of an unsolved mystery, does not have the time to look in the mirror. If the Crusades were to end, if the endless cataloguing of stolen war gear were to finally cease, the silence would utterly destroy them. They would be forced to face the glass. They would see a singular cyclopean eye staring back at them from the abyss. They have built an entire culture upon the altar of learning, becoming unparalleled scholars of the galactic dark. Yet for all their vast libraries and unparalleled intellect, they remain prisoners of a history too damning to speak aloud. The Blood Ravens are not mere scavengers picking over the bones of a dying empire. They are the absolute embodiment of the Imperium in its terminal decline. Brilliant minds are shackled to blind dogma. Their psychic brethren possess intellects that could have rebuilt shattered star systems, yet they are paralyzed by esoteric guilt and crippling suspicion. Every scrap of truth they unearth turns to ash in their gauntlets. Their greatest revelations have never brought enlightenment. Instead, they have yielded only bitter schism, fratricidal civil war, and the cold judgment of exterminatus upon the worlds they swore to protect. The ashes of Tartarus and Cyrene bear silent witness to their disastrous pursuit of knowledge. Whispers in the broader Adeptus Astartes paint them as covetous hoarders of relics that belong to other forces. This crude reputation entirely misses the profound sorrow of their existence. They grasp frantically at the master-crafted war gear of dead heroes because they have no founding myth of their own to cling to. They hoard the history of others because their own past is a terrifying redacted void. This obsessive acquisition is not greed, but a desperate psychological defense against the oblivion of their own nameless genesis. Consider the mythological ideal of the Space Marine. Imperial propaganda envisions them as radiant angels of death, pure of purpose and unbreakable in spirit. Now look upon the grim reality of the modern blood raven. They are exhausted phantoms bleeding out in the irradiated mud of the Aurelian subsector. Their leadership has devolved into a paranoid cabal of augmented cyborgs and ancient dreadnoughts. These veterans are interred in armored sarcophagi because the flesh of their masters has failed as completely as their governing philosophy. They march to endless war under the heavy shadow of constant internal purges. Battle brothers watch one another for the slightest manifestation of the warp. Commanders deceive their captains, and captains lie to their sergeants, all to protect forbidden secrets that are actively rotting the chapter from within. They have faced Tyranid hive fleets, Eldari war hosts, and the primordial annihilation of the Immaterium. They have survived everything a hostile galaxy could manifest against them, yet in their obsessive crusade to uncover their origins, they have systematically dismantled their own souls. They are scholars who burned their own archives to survive the long night. They are elite warriors who slaughtered their own corrupted chapter master just to maintain a fragile illusion of purity. The Blood Ravens have secured their survival in a galaxy of horrors, but they have saved absolutely nothing of themselves in the process. Their unending crusade leaves behind only scorched earth and silenced witnesses. Silence reigns within the sprawling basilica of the Omnis Arcanum as it drifts through the freezing void. Thick incense smoke crawls across the obsidian floor, undisturbed by the fury of the galaxy outside. A single librarian walks among the towering shelves of the deepest librarium. His heavy footfalls are swallowed by the vast, suffocating quiet of the battle barge. Flickering candlelight dances across his blood-red ceramite, casting long, distorted shadows against rows of ancient ferrocrete. These endless corridors form a monument to an eternal obsession. Vault after vault bleeds into the darkness, packed with the physical memories of 1,000 shattered worlds. Tattered banners from long-dead Astra Militarum regiments hang beside Xeno's artifacts, locked in humming stasis fields. Millions of ancient data slates line the iron racks, their screens glowing faintly with redacted truths, stolen lore, and forbidden prophecies. This is a hoard forged not in the simple fires of righteous conquest, but through the desperate compulsion of the lost. Every crumbling scroll and glowing memory crystal represents a fragment of someone else's past. The librarian pauses before a shrine of captured relics, his horned helm reflecting the dim yellow flame of a solitary votive candle. He raises a massive gauntlet to brush the centuries of dust from a shattered Inquisition seal. His chapter has sacrificed entire planetary sectors to secure such fragile prizes. They have spilled the blood of sworn brothers and betrayed the trust of ancient allies, all to drag one more secret back into the cold dark of the fleet. Knowledge is their armor against the gnawing emptiness of their genesis. They stockpile the triumphs and tragedies of 10,000 worlds, building literal walls of parchment to keep the spectre of their own damnation at bay. The ink on these pages is soaked in the blood of countless martyrs. The blood ravens have scavenged the battlefields of the Horus heresy, the dark corners of the Webway, and the ruined cathedral cities of the Imperium Nihilus. They take the ancestral swords of proud chapters and the private journals of martyred saints, locking them away in the belly of a ship that never stops running. They are hoarders of memory in a universe that actively destroys it. The librarian turns away from the seal and continues his long march down the aisle of forgotten things. He is a guardian of echoes, surrounded by the whispers of the dead. The Imperium burns in the fires of an endless war, and the galaxy teeters on the brink of total annihilation. Yet these crimson scholars remain locked in their shadowed vaults, forever sifting through the ashes of time. They scour the stars for fragments of absolute truth, terrified of what they might find, and terrified even more of finding nothing at all. Each stolen relic is a distraction from the encroaching doom that haunts their mysterious genocide. Each redacted text is a mirror they refuse to look into. The Blood Ravens are the ultimate archivists of a dying galaxy, clutching tightly to the histories of lesser men because they dare not read the final pages of their own.